What's going on, everybody? I'm Johnny Brook. Welcome back to another Crafted Workshop video. Welcome back to part 2 of the computer desk build. So in this part, we're obviously going to get the desk finished. We're going to build the drawer fronts, do the top, do the finishing, as well as install the hardware. So stay tuned. With the midsection and cabinet leg carcasses finished in part 1, let's move on to working on the drawers. Also, if you haven't already seen part 1, I definitely recommend checking that out before moving on. So the drawers are made out of 1/2-inch plywood for the sides and 1/4-inch plywood for the drawer bottoms. First, I cut the drawer bottoms to size, and as long as I cut the drawer bottoms square, theoretically the rest of the drawer should follow suit. After cutting the drawer bottoms, I started assembling the drawers with brad nails and glue. First, I laid a bead of glue on the bottom, placed the drawer sides onto the bottom, and then used a few brad nails to tack the sides together. I worked around the drawer and attached all of the sides to each other, then flipped the drawer over and tacked the bottom on again with brad nails. Once everything was held together, I went back and reinforced all the corners and the drawer bottom with 1.25-inch screws. I continued assembling the rest of the drawers, then moved on to cutting the handles into the drawer fronts. So I made a quick template out of a scrap piece of 1/2-inch plywood, used double stick tape to attach the template to the drawer front, and then used a template bit on the router table to cut the handle into the drawer front. This method ensures that every drawer will have an identical pull cut into it and goes much quicker than trying to cut the pull into each drawer individually. Next, I built the keyboard tray, which is essentially just a drawer without a front. The keyboard tray is made out of 1/2-inch plywood, and I drilled 2 holes into the back to allow the cables for the keyboard and mouse to pass through into the midsection. I also rounded over the holes just to make sure they didn't snag the cables, and I also rounded over the front edge of the keyboard tray for a little bit of comfort. Also, don't forget I have plans available for this desk if you're interested in building one for yourself. I'll have a link to the plans in the video description below. With the drawers and keyboard tray assembled, I moved on to working on the top. The top is connected with 2 30-inch piano hinges, and I have links to these and all the other hardware I used in this build in the video description below. Once I made sure the top fit correctly, I chamfered all the edges of the top, including the top edge and the bottom edge. Plywood has a tendency to delaminate at the corners since the veneers can get knocked around and start peeling up, and adding a chamfer like this really helped and also just gives the top a nice look and feel. Next, I installed all the drawer slides into the cabinet carcasses. It's a lot easier to do this prior to finishing, since any errors you might make can be covered up during painting. I used inexpensive bottom mount drawer slides, which I also have links to in the video description, and they install really easily. Once the drawers were installed, I installed the drawer fronts. As you can see, I also added a little chamfer to all the edges of the drawer fronts. Again, this will help with wear and tear. To install the drawer fronts, I used the playing card trick to end up with an even reveal around all of the edges of the drawer fronts. After spacing them properly, I used spring clamps to hold them in place while attaching them with screws from the inside of the drawer. The final touch on the cabinets were these spacer blocks, which I cut from scrap pieces of plywood. The casters I used needed 1.5 inches of depth for mounting, so adding these spacers gave me that depth, and I just glued and brad nailed them into place. Next, I needed to give the midsection and cabinets some way to stay aligned while still allowing the pieces to be separated for moving the desk. I came up with the idea to use biscuits, and this worked out great. I put 2 biscuits in the front edge of the midsection and cabinet, and then cut 3 more biscuit slots along the outside edge. These 2 biscuit locations keep the biscuits aligned in both directions, since biscuits have a little bit of slop. I could have also used dowels here, but I was afraid they might be a little tight, making it difficult to get the midsection and cabinets apart later. Once I had all of the biscuits cut and test fit, I glued the bottom half of the biscuit into the cabinet carcasses and left the top half without glue. So after getting all the hardware installed, it was time to prep for finish. I started by sanding everything flush between the midsection and cabinets, starting with 80 grit and working my way up to 180 grit. Next, I filled any screw holes, voids, or other imperfections with Minwax high performance wood filler, which I will not use again. The fumes from this were horrible, and I had to air out my garage for a few hours to get rid of the smell. I've seen joint compound used for this same purpose with painted plywood, and I'll be using that in the future. So with any imperfections filled, I sanded every surface of the desk, working my way up to 180 grit. This took a really long time, as there is a lot of surface area on this desk. And one nice benefit of using a hardwood plywood like Pure Bond is that it required a lot less sanding and surface prep than something like sheathing grade plywood. PureBond is the sponsor of this video, and I use their plywood for pretty much any of my indoor plywood project needs. PureBond is made in North America, uses formaldehyde-free glue, and is great quality. To learn more about PureBond, check out the link in the video description below. With all the surfaces sanded and wiped down to remove any dust, it was time for paint. I used General Finishes Lamp Black Milk Paint and first attempted to spray it. So I used an Earlex HV5500 HVLP system with a 2mm tip and just could not get the paint to spray well, no matter how much I thinned it. I really have no idea what the issue was, but painting this desk was an incredibly frustrating process. I wanted to show this footage in real time just to show you how slow it was. After trying to spray the finish for about half an hour and not being able to get even one serviceable coat onto the top, I moved on to painting the desk by hand. For some idiotic reason, I thought using a roller wouldn't leave a nice enough surface finish, so I painted the entire desk by hand with a brush with the help of my incredibly patient wife. We spent 7 straight hours applying 2 coats of paint, sanding in between coats. After applying the paint, I sprayed 3 coats of General Finishes high-performance water-based polyurethane over the paint, sanding with 320 grit sandpaper in between coats. And as you can see in this clip, this is the type of flow I'm looking for my HVLP. A nice, even, wet coat. And one other little tip, I've noticed high performance goes on and looks a little rough, but it self-levels incredibly well. The surface was glass smooth after it dried. Once the clear coat had dried, I reinstalled the hardware. I added this piano hinge for the subwoofer access panel. To keep the access panel closed, I installed a sliding barrel bolt. Next, I installed all the electronics in the midsection. First, I installed the fans, which I couldn't have done without one of these 90-degree impact driver attachments. Next, I installed one of the USB charging ports. After that, I installed the other USB hub and power button and used the playing card trick again for even spacing. The next pieces of hardware were the cable pass-through brush plates. There were 5 of these, and they were really simple to install. I just screwed them right into the midsection. And just a tip, a lot of these pieces are designed to fit right onto a computer case or an outlet, so you might need to get creative with your screws since you probably won't be able to use the ones that are included with the hardware. Next, I installed the 12-inch drawer slide for the keyboard tray. After that, I installed the piano hinges to the back of the top and then installed the gas lift struts. These were a real pain to install, and I didn't get most of it on camera, honestly because I had really no idea what I was doing. I did have to cut this 1.5-inch square notch out of the center divider, which is reflected in the SketchUp file that comes with the plans for this desk. And I also have links to the exact struts I used in the video description. The final step in this build was to install the casters. First, I drilled the holes for the casters to mount in, then removed the sleeve from the casters and pounded them into the holes with a hammer, and the casters just pop in after that. Also, my little niece found these casters incredibly fascinating. With that, the desk was done. Alright, hopefully you guys enjoyed this 2-part build. This was a really intense one for me. Again, I have plans available on my website. They have a detailed SketchUp file, a cut list, and a cutting diagram so that you can build one of these for yourselves. And really, it doesn't require a ton of tooling. I mean, obviously I used a table saw and a track saw and all that kind of stuff, but realistically, you could build this entire desk with a circular saw and a drill. It's all sheet goods, so pretty simple to work with. I would recommend going with a high quality plywood. I used PureBond hardwood plywood for this. It's just a lot easier to get a smooth surface finish, and for something like a desktop like this, you really want that. You could also build this out of MDF, but I don't know that MDF is quite as durable, so I went with hardwood plywood. That's obviously up to you. The total cost for this desk was probably around $400, $500 in materials, somewhere in that range. That obviously depends on the quality of plywood you go with, the type of finishing material, the quality of the hardware, all that kind of stuff. So those are all personal choices, but compared to what this type of desk would cost in a store, that's obviously a steal. If you are into gaming, computer gaming, or video editing, or any sort of intensive computer work, this thing would be perfect. Obviously, it's got tons of airflow with the vents on either side. There are 2 fans on the right and 2 fans on the left to kind of make some circulation of air through there, so the component should stay nice and cool. It's got custom mounting brackets for all of the client I built this for hardware, but you could obviously customize that to your needs. And really, I just think think this is a super cool desk. I love the sleek look. I love the drawer pulls. I mean, how that's all integrated into the drawer fronts. This just came out really, really cool. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. If you don't already, please go ahead and get subscribed. I have new project videos every Tuesday. Also, if you want to support me a little more, check out the affiliate links in the video description. I've got links to all the tools I use, all the materials I use. They cost you nothing and they really help me fund future projects like this. Thanks again for watching, guys, and until next time, happy building.